All right. Well, I'm here with one of my buds, Greg Bogdan from Total Living Network out of Chicago. Greg, how you doing, man?
Good, I'm doing good. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing real good. Man, I feel like I've known you my whole life, like we're brothers and stuff. Obviously, we haven't known each other our whole lives, but we got a lot in
Good to see
common, man. We,
you.
we, we
Yeah,
both look really good together, right? Look at that. Bald head, beards.
yeah, exactly.
Um, First, man, I want to congratulate you. You guys just won 3 Emmy Awards. That is so
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was crazy, man. Totally unexpected. We threw it in the hat, hoping to see something come up, just to see, even see a nomination. But when I was actually laid back. We were enjoying the Emmys, just and not really thinking much about it. And then they called our name, and it was like, what? Wait a second, we just won an Emmy. So, and then we ended up, getting a clean sweep and won all three of them. So it was thing. But
So
anyway.
now, obviously, I know about the project and stuff, but tell me a little bit more about the project, like I don't know.
Yeah, it was interesting. Probably I had just moved into a new town called Plainfield, Illinois. And we ended up hearing about a church that had kind of just started about a year ago, and they were meeting at a school. And so my wife and I ended up going out there and just checking out the service. And long story short, this big burly tattooed guy came walking up onto the stage and led in prayer. And I'm thinking that's kind of odd, not totally normal, although it's becoming more normal, I guess today than it would have been 10 years ago. But he came up afterwards and just talked briefly about some of the ministry he was doing. And it was just like God just smacked me upside the head and said, you need to tell this guy's story. And so what really started out more of a goal to just do an interview with Chris turned into a year-long project documenting his work. Long story short, Chris works with sex traffic victims, ex-gang offenders, people that were incarcerated, and really people that are trying to make it through a major 180 shift in their life, going down a road that was just completely messed up, and turning that, obviously, hopefully giving the glory to God during that process. But Chris actually removes their tattoos of their past life, and he does it all free of charge, as long as they're coming out of something pretty serious. So he's been doing it like 4 years, 5 years now, and has done, thousands of sessions for free. So it's a pretty neat story.
Yeah, my understanding, just from getting to know the project a little bit, was he was out of prison and stuff, and I guess FBI reached out to him and asked if he wanted to put some of those talents to good use. And these sex trafficking victims, they had actual like barcodes tattooed on their bodies, like, this is your brand, and they would get scanned in this sex trafficking ring. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, when we got into the project, it was one of those where, you leave every night thinking, I got to go, take a shower. I got to go do something to get myself out of my head, because it would just stick with you. But there were stories about, 13-year-old girls that had been sold into sex slavery by their grandmothers, for instance, for a crack cocaine debt of a few $100 or whatever, just these sad stories. But many of the pimps now, it's actually one of the fastest growing crimes in America, because they call them boomerangs. They can take these girls and have them out on the street. They come back, they put them out again, and it's just like a boomerang, and making money every time. But these pimps now, and a lot of it is gang controlled, but these pimps are actually putting barcodes and or brands, if you would call it, almost like cattle, putting brands on these girls, so that if they were to get away, they've got these codes, and the barcode itself doesn't work, but the numbering system itself is actually related back to a pimp. And it could be a pimp in Chicago, and if this girl gets away and makes it into LA, and another pimp catches her, he can actually somehow figure this out. And the FBI hasn't figured out where it's at or how they're hiding these numbers, but they do know there's linkage to these girls and these pimps through that coding.
And so he covers that tattoo up with something that is maybe a positive memory from their past, or something that they can look forward to, or some kind of religious thing. But he's doing a service for them and stuff. So I know that the project, it was more than just the sex trafficking. It was, people coming out of all sorts of different walks of life and stuff. But the project itself was a pretty big documentary you guys undertook. And that process, what does that look like? What was the pre-production side of things? Was it different than other projects you work on? What was the unfolding of it all? How'd that look?
Yeah, when we got into it, we thought, okay, a few days in the studio, we'd be done and go back and edit this thing out and, have it in post for a few weeks and be done. And I think I said a few minutes ago, but it ended up taking us about a year. We had a very small team. One of the things we decided at the front end is that we really wanted to do this ourselves instead of having it go out-house, because we really wanted to be able to tell the story in a way that really showed how God gets down with people and get them out of life struggles that are just seem almost impossible to many of us. Cutters, for instance, and many of these people. And so, we ended up having a crew of about 5 people, mainly 1 or 2 guys that were on it pretty consistently. So it was a big project. That's part of the reason it took a long time. But a lot of it was, we'd get out and we'd set up, all the cameras and the lighting. We have a guy that was supposed to be coming in at 10 a.m. from some gang. It would be obviously not from the gang, but some gang-related guy that had got out of the lifestyle of gang activity, and they wouldn't show. And so then they'd call at noon or 1 o'clock, say, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. And so we'd get out and set up again, and they'd make it in. But that day, they really weren't willing to put it on camera. They weren't willing to sign releases. And so we've never been in a project before that was so up in the air. You get sex traffic victims in there, and it was really tough to know how to ask the right questions. And Chris was amazing with, this is what he does for a living, but you'd ask a question and they would totally shut down, and you'd be like, man, we just screwed this up, So it was really tough from that perspective to get into the story enough that it really was compelling, and yet at the same time not ask so many questions that we became offensive or got them back into that because a lot of these girls were still going through that reality of recovery.
So that makes the production element of it quite a bit different than like a traditional like studio production or something where you're able to storyboard everything out.
Right.
The pre-production side of that, did you do storyboarding? Did you do any scripting and stuff? Were there elements that you planned before you actually set things up, or how'd that look?
Well, originally, we ended up changing direction partway through, and originally we were planning on telling Chris's story. But the more we spent time with Chris and the more we spent time getting these stories, we realized we really wanted to tell the stories of these other people through the eyes of Chris. Kind of this element of it's his life, it's his lifestyle, it's his ministry, but we wanted to really tell the stories of the people, not Chris himself. So that changed because we had originally built a lot on the front end of it as far as how we thought this was going to go. But because of the fact that we ended up getting out there and really learned that we had to just go out and get enough stories that we really saw the thing kind of come together in itself, it kind of took on a life of its own. At one point, I think you and I had talked about this, but we ended up in LA pitching to several of the big studios, completely unexpected. But we got off course, kind of trying to see, okay, can we end up landing an episodic out of this thing with one of the big studios? And although they were excited, I think there were a few elements in it that were pretty tough for the studios themselves to handle. So we ended up, going more back to the concept of the documentary. But all in all, it was a wild ride because it was definitely, when you're recording in studio or when you got a weekly show where the drill and it's going to be day 1 is this, day 2 is this, and we go to tape on Thursday. It was that type of documentary, and really it almost built itself over time. So it's interesting.
I know that your situation is probably different than different people that might be in school right now learning how to do production and learning how to do get the nuts and bolts of putting stuff like this together. You've got somewhat of a backing from a television network and stuff, and from an existing production house. Obviously there's some new elements to the production side of things, but the financial aspect of productions is always something that I think people it's the difficult thing, because you don't always know where the money's going to come from to make a production. You don't always know what the outcome's going to be to pay for that production. And so tell me a little bit about some of those decisions with regards to this project.
Yeah, when I originally went in and talked with our president about the project, we had just started talking about the idea of setting up a separate entity in our network itself, focused on production. It's now called 42 Media, and this was our first real production in that vein, so to speak. For me, it was my first executive producer, title or position, if you want to call it that. And even when we originally came up with the idea, it was one of those, it was out of the box enough because it didn't really fit heavily into the Christian television, spectrum. It didn't fit into the secular because it had a really strong Christian message. So we knew it was going to be a little bit risky from the standpoint of how it was going to be able to generate funds and be able to get distribution and so forth. So we prayed about it, and I really felt that God had put this in my head that this was supposed to be done. And my president gave me the green light to move on it, as long as we could come up with funding. And so the 2 days later, we ended up having a guy in the office I'd never met before. And long story short, within a week, he funded the project. He loved the idea. He loved the concept. And so it was an interesting thing where, that's not normal either. So this whole project has had its, complete abnormalities. Usually it's, you're putting all these scripts and pilots and all kind, or, some type of pilot and idea together. And it was more a conversation that led to a check that led to us jumping on this project and going with it. So it's been an interesting project. I know that wouldn't be the way the next project's going to go. But, one of the things we did, we stayed really tight on the budget from the standpoint of, again, with a small team. We ended up using one group crew of freelancers to get us some shots with a camera that we didn't have, that we really felt that we needed the energy of a certain type of camera in the field. So we ended up getting that from someone else. But for the most part, it was just a crew of guys going at it heavy and staying focused. So it was interesting to see it come together. And again, to get Emmys out of our first project like that is pretty awesome. It's not why we do it, but definitely a cool reality when it happened,
Yeah. How long have you been doing Christian media, and at what different levels? What all types of things have you done, just in brief?
Yeah, I started out doing just general sales for the company I'm now COO at, Total Living Network. And then really felt that there was a need for commercial sales inside of Christian TV. And so started a company called Christian Alliance Media Group, and we mainly focused on advertising sales, some ministry sales, but working across the United States with secular organizations, seeing the value of Christian television. And now I've come back to the executive or the management side of TV. I love every element of it. I love being able to tell stories and really see people's lives impacted through media. So it's nice to be a part of this. It's never something I didn't go to school for it. I'm one of those slugs that somehow made it in just right and was blessed through the process. But I never would have picked this road for me. But now that I'm here, I absolutely love it.
So what would you say? I mean, you work with a lot of different ministries and different Christian producers and stuff that are putting content on your network. What is there a need, and what's the benefit, the value of somebody who's going into the production world? Do we need more Christians in that arena? I mean, isn't there a lot of Christian stuff out there?
Well, once you're in Christian TV, and I'm sure you've always heard it too, as long as you can, give the gospel message at the end of the show, you've done a good job, and although there's a value to that of always knowing that the medium we're in is what I consider the greatest medium to spread the gospel to the masses, I think there definitely, I wish I would have been able to go to school and have some of the expertise that I see, some of these up and coming kids and young producers have. I mean, it's amazing. And, I think it's encouraging to see Christians in the secular marketplace trying to make a difference out there. I'm sure it's hard with a lot of the elements out there in Hollywood, or even just on general secular stations. But yeah, definitely, I'd love to see more people, more Christians coming into media and really being a part of affecting culture through television.
You had some pretty cool opportunities because of this project to make some pretty some pitches to some pretty influential secular networks, and it was cool to see and kind of walk down that road with you. from the
Yeah.
standpoint that you're a Christian producer who produced a project, a documentary, obviously a great one, won some Emmys, but a great project that clearly has a very, very Christian message within it and stuff. How's that work? I mean, Hollywood doesn't care for Christian messages, right?
You know, honestly, Hollywood's looking for a good story that sells. I mean, that's really what I learned from this project. I think that a lot of Christians think that Hollywood is opposed to the gospel, or they're opposed to the message of the Bible or Christianity in general. I think what Hollywood's looking for is money. I think the reality is they want success, and they want whatever project they're going to work on to pull an audience and be able to generate income. And, you know, I think that's really the reality. And I think that a lot of times and I hate to say it this way, but I think as Christians, a lot of times we can use the argument, well, Hollywood doesn't want, you know, good Christian programming. I think they do. I think they want really good programming generally. I don't think they care so much. You know, I mean, I'm saying that, of course, I do believe there's a liberal left, and I think there's a definitely left-leaning reality to Hollywood. But I think that for the right project, I mean, we've seen it with Duck Dynasty, we've seen it with other projects where you can still keep a solid biblical message in a project if it's something that can attract an audience.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously know you and stuff, and I know you to be one of the most passionate followers of Christ around. I mean, your love for the Lord is very evident and very real and stuff. And so when we talk about just the raw realities of production and Hollywood, and, you know, do we put the message in, or do we? I recognize who I'm talking to. Obviously, the audience may not know that and stuff, but a lot of the students in my class that are aspiring towards, you know, Hollywood, or aspiring towards some sort of production role or messaging and stuff, story is really important to them, and the Christian message is very important to them. But they're very much wanting to make sure that they're not making the Christian element of it so obvious or so glaring. They feel it's more tasteful to maybe have that tucked in somewhere within it and stuff. What can you speak to that? What are your thoughts on that? What kind of advice can you give towards something like that?
I think there's a fine balance with all that. You know, I think, you know, when you look at, if we take it out of media for a second and go to the church itself, I think the message of the gospel itself is compelling. I think it's and I don't think that, if you look at our next generation, for instance, I don't think they're scared of Christianity. I don't think they're scared of the gospel. I think they're scared of fake religion. I think they don't like religion itself. So I think putting the true message into the media is absolutely warranted, and I think it works. I think that the problem is when we try and make it religious. You know, one of the things I learned with this project, when I got into this thing, I'll give you a great example. I thought, okay, this is all going to be focused on sex trafficking because it's such a big, you know, we can all agree on it. You know, we can all agree that no girl at the age of 13 should be trafficked into, you know, whether it be one time or 10,000 times. You know, we can all agree on that. So that's a good story, and I can stay close on that and not get myself into some spiritual or religious struggle. But one of the things I was the most critical about in myself is when we started dealing with a lot of the gang activity stuff and these guys getting out of gangs. I had no compassion for these kids. I had none. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't even look at them. I didn't understand what it meant to humanize someone like that. I mean, these are real people that have gone through real struggles, and a lot of them made really stupid mistakes and whatever. But they're real people and making real changes in their life, and they need people. They need the church, the body of Christ, to step up and stand around them and be a part of their life change. And I think that that's, when we look at media, that it can do that to us. I think that it can give us a new insight into something that we're struggling with. And I think to hide from the realities of the spiritual world we're living in, I think, I'm not saying it's wrong. I think there's ways to do it properly, but I think we got to always make sure we get back to the basics of it. Going back to what I said, I kind of went on a rabbit trail there. But you know, with the church today, I think that a lot of times the church itself struggles so much to try and create the audience that they lose the message. And I think that we can do that in television just like we can in the church if we're not careful. And then we have a watered down message that really doesn't get us anything but a good audience. But then what? You know? Yeah.
So, I mean, as the your official title at Total Living Network, it's COO, right?
Yeah.
So as chief operations officer at TLN, what types of stuff do you wish you would see more of from young producers, from people putting stuff together?
Well, I think music is big and it's hard to deal with, but I think music is definitely something that people tend to love to watch, no matter if they do it well. But I think that, there's a lot of good church programs out there as far as recording a Sunday morning service. I'd love to see people get involved with storytelling. It doesn't have to be expensive. People are doing stuff on iPhones now. We just recently had a guy in that was working with us, a young kid. I think he was 18, and been doing a bunch of work on his iPhone, and it was phenomenal. I mean, it really was good stuff. And it's just, obviously he did a lot of work in post on it, but it was good stuff. So I'd like to see the innovation of the new generation coming out. But still, like you were saying, seeing that passion of God still in that media, where we're not losing it to capture an audience, but we're just really, really focused on telling a good story.
Yeah. What advice or words of wisdom would you give to the class? It's media and the church, Christian media and general media associated with the church, media of the church. What type of advice would you give to that crowd?
Man, wisdom. I don't know if I have any of that. I'm still too young for that. I'm joking. I think the biggest thing for me, and I think it's something even in my own walk I lack all the time, is stay dedicated to prayer. I mean, I know that sounds trite and simple, and wow, I learned that in second grade, but anytime, even with this project, anytime we are truly fulfilling God's purpose and calling in our life, whether it's in our job, whether it's in our home or whatever, we're truly fulfilling it, we're going to have spiritual tension. And I think that a lot of times we don't recognize how much that prayer is going to make a difference in allowing us to achieve what God has called us to do. And I think, again, with this project, had we not bathed it in prayer, had we not come back to the table and prayed over this project and said, God, we got to keep consistent in what we're doing, and, get this mess out of our head of these stories we keep hearing, whatever it is, and let us be making, help us make a difference in these people's lives. One of the things that that aspect did for this is one of the kids, one of the gang, ex-gang kids that we were working with, 18 years old, came in as he'd given his life to the Lord. About 3 weeks after we were done with the production with him, he got shot in the stomach with a .45 on his porch. And again, he's out of the gang life, but got shot in the stomach, and he ended up moving in with one of the crew on this project for a period of time while he recovered, and helped, ultimately they tried to help him get his life straight. And again, I think that element of prayer and just staying dedicated to what God called us to, we can make it through a lot of mess if we can keep dedicated to what God's called us to.
Okay, before we go, on a personal note, tell me, and anybody who's watching, tell me, biggest leap of faith you've taken in your life. I know you're a man of faith, and so I can ask that and know that you got to think through the different things.
Boy, biggest leap of faith. I know, I went to Africa. I would say my biggest struggle, I have a daughter. She's now 11 with Down syndrome. She was born with 3 holes in her heart and had open heart surgery, and lived the first year and a half of her life on pins and needles. Almost didn't make it, got very sick. And when I felt called to Africa, we called Liberia, West Africa. It's third poorest country in the world, and very rough as far as, sicknesses and so forth. And when I felt the calling, went through a big struggle with God of, if I take her out here, are you going to protect her? And I think for me, getting over that fear of taking, I have 12 kids, so taking all my kids there was a big leap. Taking her specifically because I was scared to death at one point. I don't know if it was a spiritual battle or if it was just my head playing with me, that she wasn't going to make it through and she wasn't going to be coming back with us, because I really felt she was going to catch some sickness or something and not make it because she was a little bit too weak to make it through. But the coolest thing that happened is all the kids, a lot of them got malaria, got different sicknesses and so forth, but the entire time we were there, not once did Liberty even get a cold. And I think that was God showing his provision and his protection of our family. So anyway, I think that was probably for me one of the biggest leaps of faith I have to make.
Man, that's awesome. That's great. And it probably shapes a little bit about, where you're at in life even today and in the future, that you can be reminded that God's faithful always, and if he gives you a calling, he'll give you the strength to succeed at that calling.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, man, I appreciate you taking a little bit of your time. Huge congrats, 3 Emmys. That's pretty exciting, man. And hopefully, we'll get you on again, maybe in some other things and stuff, and eventually we'll do some projects together.
Absolutely, I hope so. Thanks, Josh.
All right, man. Very good.
Easy.